Near the town of Tarnopol, in the last week of June 1941, a Soviet tank driver named Smolyakov Erastovich felt the friction clutch burn out under his hands. His tank rolled to the shoulder of the road and stopped. It weighed close to 60 tons. It carried 5 turrets and 3 cannon. And Erastovich climbed out, set a charge, and destroyed it himself, with no German anywhere in sight. That machine was the T-35. 6 years before, Stalin had rolled it across Red Square as the face of Soviet power. Foreign officers watched it grind past and wrote home about it. Its picture filled propaganda posters. It was the largest tank the Red Army ever put into service, and the only tank in the world with 5 turrets ever built in real numbers. It did not die fighting a German panzer. 59 of these giants stood on the Red Army's books that June. Within a month, almost everyone was gone, and the men who destroyed most of them wore Soviet uniforms. How many ever fired a shot at the enemy is a number I will give you at the end, and it is smaller than you think. This is the story of a 60-ton mistake, a Soviet idea that died on its own, with no help from the enemy. The idea itself was the villain. In the years after the First World War, armies dreamed of a land battleship. One enormous machine, bristling with guns, that would roll over trenches and crush a defensive line by itself. The British built a prototype for it in the 1920s, a huge thing called the Independent, with 1 big turret and 4 small ones around it. It never entered service. But drawings of it travelled, and the idea took root in Moscow. Soviet planners loved it. A single fortress on tracks could carry a big gun to smash bunkers, smaller guns to kill lighter tanks, and machine guns to sweep away infantry, all at once, all from one hull. On paper, it answered every problem a tank could face. The men who drew it up believed they were building the future. The design bureau went to work in Leningrad and then in Kharkov under an engineer named Barikov. What came off the drawing board in 1933 was the T-35. 5 turrets, stacked 2 levels high. The main turret sat on top and carried a 76mm gun for bunkers and buildings. 2 more turrets carried 45mm guns for enemy armour, set on opposite corners so the tank could fight left and right at the same time. 2 smaller turrets carried machine guns. Around 30 feet of tank, over 11 feet tall, painted and polished for the cameras. It took 10 men to fight it. A commander, gunners and loaders for the big guns, machine gunners, and a driver down in the front. On the march, 2 mechanics rode along to keep it running, which brought the crew to 12. 12 men inside one machine, and the commander could not see or reach most of them. He sat in the top turret. The men in the side turrets were sealed off below him in their own steel boxes, watching their own narrow slits. When the fighting started, each turret fought its own little war and hoped the others were doing the same. That was the first crack, and it was built in from the start. A tank commander is supposed to be one brain running one machine. In the T-35, he was one man shouting into a set of intercoms, blind to half his own vehicle, trying to aim 5 guns at once. Once the engine roared and the guns fired and smoke filled the hull, he lost the side turrets entirely. Each gunner fought what he could see through his own slit and nothing more. In practice, the commander could not run it. The land battleship was a committee under fire. There was a deeper problem underneath the machine, and Spain had already shown it. In the Civil War there, cheap anti-tank guns, small enough for a few men to push into place, had knocked out tank after tank. The whole world's tank designers watched it happen and drew the same conclusion. Armour had to get thicker, and tanks had to get faster and harder to hit. A giant with thin plates and 5 turrets was the exact wrong shape for the war that was coming. The Soviets themselves saw it. That is why they stopped building the T-35 and started drawing its replacement. The early tanks weighed around 50 tons. As the years passed, the Red Army bolted thicker plates onto the front, trying to keep the giant relevant against better guns, and the weight climbed towards 60 tons. But the engine never changed. It stayed a 500 horsepower motor the whole time. So every new model was heavier than the last, dragged by the same tired engine, and each one came out slower and broke down more than the one before, the machine aging backward. Then there was the price. One T-35 cost the Soviet state 525,000 rubles. For that money, the same factory could have built 9 BT-5 light tanks. 9 fast, simple tanks, or 1 slow giant. The giant looked magnificent on Red Square. Up to 20 of them would roll across the square at a time, past the leadership and the foreign attachés, and the message was plain. Look what Soviet industry can build. Look how strong we are. The message was a lie, and the people who built it were starting to suspect it. Out on the training grounds, away from the cameras, the T-35 broke down again and again. The engine was a 500 horsepower aircraft motor asked to haul 60 tons, and it strained the whole drivetrain every mile. The clutches burned. The gearbox stripped. It crawled along at under 20 miles an hour on a good road and less across country. It was so heavy that moving it any real distance meant loading it onto a rail car, because the roads and bridges of the Soviet Union were not built for a moving fortress. And the armour, the one thing a fortress must have, was thin. The plates ran from under half an inch to a little over an inch on most of the tank, and only the front got thicker in the final models. That was fine in 1933, when few guns could reach it. By 1941, a common anti-tank gun could punch straight through it from a distance. The 5 turrets that made it a marvel also made it enormous, and enormous made it a target no gunner could miss. By 1940, the Red Army already knew. Production had stopped. Only 61 were ever built, prototypes included, and most were pulled back from the frontline brigades and handed to training schools. The land battleship was already a museum piece in the minds of the men who ran the tank force. A newer, smaller, faster tank was coming, 1 turret, sloped armour, a good gun. The T-34. The future was going to be the opposite of the T-35 in every way. Then came the 22nd of June 1941, and the theory did not matter anymore. Germany invaded. And the old giants, the ones nobody wanted, got swept up into the fight anyway. 59 T-35s stood on the Army's books that morning. Only 48 were fit to move. Most of them belonged to one formation, the 34th Tank Division of the 8th Mechanized Corps, down in western Ukraine near Lvov. When the order came to advance and counterattack toward the towns of Brody and Dubno, these tanks had to go with it. The heaviest, slowest, oldest machines in the force were sent to lead a fast-moving battle. The Corps commander was Lieutenant General Dmitry Ryabyshev, and his orders kept changing. Advance here. Halt. Turn back. Attack there instead. His tanks were marched forward, then pulled back, then sent forward again on a different line. By the time the Corps closed with the enemy, it had covered better than 300 miles of Ukrainian road. About half of its older tanks were already gone, worn out by the marching, broken down and abandoned in the dust and the heat. And all the while, German aircraft hunted the column from above. The crews marched under near constant air attack in the desperate, exhausting first week of a losing war. T-35 was the tallest thing on the road, over 11 feet of steel, slow and impossible to hide. It was every pilot's dream target. There was a real fear in riding it, and the men felt it, exposed at the front of a beaten army with the sky against them. For a fast, simple tank, that march was punishing. For the T-35, it was fatal. They never reached the battle as a fighting unit. What happened instead was a week-long road march that took them apart one at a time. The division's own war journal reads like a countdown. The tanks set off. By the 24th of June, of 38 T-35s in the division, about 17 were still keeping up. By the 26th, only 10 were still with the column. By the 27th, every remaining one had fallen behind. They were lost to the road itself, not to any German gun. A clutch here. A gearbox there. An engine gone on a hill. The giant would stop, and the column would leave it behind. There was no time and no way to tow 60 tons out of a fighting retreat. Driver Erastovich lived that march. He was, by his own village's reckoning, the best tractor driver they had. So they handed him the biggest machine in the army. He never forgot the first time he saw it. 5 turrets, he said, barrels sticking out in different directions. You needed a special ladder just to climb on top of it. Word cannot express it, he remembered. Scary even. 10 men in one tank, and every one of them nervous of the thing they rode. On the evening of the 27th of June, his group was still about 30 miles short of Brody when a new order arrived. Turn south, towards Loshev. So they turned and drove on, and the machines kept dying under them. Near Tarnopol, his own friction clutch burned out, the same failure that had claimed so many others, and that was the end of his war in the T-35. He blew it up and walked away. He had never fired at a German. Multiply Erastovich by the whole division, and you have the fate of the T-35. The records of the 8th Mechanized Corps lay it out cause by cause. 26 of the tanks were blown up by their own crews after they broke down. 4 for their engines. 8 for a burned out clutch. 10 for the gearbox. 4 for the transmission. 8 more sat abandoned, waiting for an overhaul that could not reach them in a collapsing front. 2 were so heavy they fell straight through bridges. 2 more sank into a swamp and stayed there. Every one of those was a machine destroyed without a German ever touching it. The crews stripped the guns and the sights, set their charges. There was a bitter shame in it. These were not cowards and not careless men. They were soldiers handed a broken idea and told to make it fight. When it failed them on the road, the only soldierly thing left was to deny the wreck to the enemy and march on with a rifle. A handful did reach the fighting. The first known real combat by a T-35 came at the very end of June on an unpaved road between 2 villages, Verba and Pichi. A few of the giants, trailing far behind their own division because they could not keep pace, ran into advancing German armour. There, at last, the land battleship did what it was built to do and traded fire. 4 T-35s were lost in that action. 15 of their crewmen became casualties. That was close to the whole combat record of the type. 1 road, a few tanks, 1 afternoon. Add it up, and the promise of the parade collapses. 59 machines went to war. Only about 7 were ever lost fighting the enemy. The rest were destroyed by their own crews, or simply left on the roadside where they stopped. The largest tank in the Red Army, the symbol Stalin showed the world, spent its war breaking down. And the men who ran the tank force learned the exact right lesson from it. Fast. The multi-turret land battleship was finished for good. Every serious army walked away from the idea and never came back. Every gun on a hull, every crewman split into his own sealed box, every ton of armour spread across a target you could see from a mile off, all of it was the wrong answer. The right answer was already rolling off the lines at Kharkov the same summer. And here is the sharpest part of it. The plant that built the T-35, the Kharkov locomotive factory, was the very same plant that now built its replacement. The same workshops, in some cases the same men, who had riveted the giant together, were bolting up the machine that made it obsolete. 1 turret. 1 gun that mattered. Sloped armour that turned shells aside instead of stopping them flat. A hull light enough to cross its own country under its own power. The T-34 became the most important tank of the war, and it was the T-35 turned inside out. Only 1 T-35 survives today. It sits at the Tank Museum at Kubinka outside Moscow in running order. It never fought. It came from a training school in the rear, far from the front, which is the only reason it is still whole. Every one of its sisters that went west in June 1941 is gone, most of them scattered along a few hundred miles of Ukrainian road, blown up by the men who drove them. 59 of these giants went to the war. Only about 7 ever fired at the enemy. The great majority died the way Erastovich's died, on the shoulder of a road by their own crew's hand, with no enemy in sight. Stalin built it to be seen. 20 at a time across Red Square, the largest tank in the world, proof of what the Soviet Union could make. And in the end, its crews saw it clearest of all. A brave idea, drawn by clever men, that could roll past a reviewing stand and could not survive its own road to the front. the land battleship never sank in battle. It simply stopped, one clutch and one gearbox at a time, and the men it was built to protect climbed down and blew it up. And they kept walking east to find a tank that worked.